Chapter 3. The Hicksby's guide had come by return post as soon as Miss Charlotte Mortimer received the letter confirming that Penelope and the children would be heading to London. It was both a practical and fashionable gift, for at the time guidebooks were all the rage, and there were scores of them available on every conceivable topic, from Audubon's Birds of America to Zachary's Taxonomy of Badgers with their cubs, accurately figured. Fans of ferns could choose from among dozens of best-selling titles. As for travel guides, there were Black's picturesque tourist guides to England, Scotland, and Wales, and Harvey's indispensable, on the cheap, touring the continent on 5 pence a day. Few would risk crossing the Atlantic without a copy of Appleton's Railroad and Steamboat Companion, being a traveler's guide through the United States of America, Canada, New Brunswick, and Nova Scotia, with maps of the country through which the routes pass in the northern, middle, and eastern states. A book whose title was as grand and as cocksure as the New World it so thrillingly described. There were scores of books about London, naturally, but in the note accompanying her gift, Miss Mortimer assured Penelope that Hicksby's was by far the best of the lot, and she should use no other to find her way around town. As the title promised, the volume was lavishly illustrated with thumbnail-sized watercolor paintings, most of which depicted wildflower meadows and snow-capped mountain peaks. Neither of these seemed to be prominent features of the city. However, the pictures were attractive, and Penelope liked them a great deal. She found herself admiring them during the long carriage ride to Ashton Station, where she and the Incorrigibles would soon be boarding the train to London. In fact, she told the children, as they stood in line to buy tickets, these miniature paintings are so delightful, I think our very first excursion must be to the British Museum. According to Hicksby, and here she thumbed her way to the appropriate page, we are to avoid crowds that throng before the more well-known works and concentrate on obscure galleries for the discerning visitor. She showed the page to the children so they could admire the illustration. It was a very pretty lake scene. Mr. Hicksby calls Gallery 17, Overuse of Symbolism in Minor Historical Portraits, a must-see. Then we must see it, Alexander replied, and Beowulf yapped in agreement. Penelope corrected him with a glance, whereupon he said, Yes, we must, just like a proper English schoolboy. Cassiopeia, still sad from her tearful leave-taking with Nutsawu back at Ashton Place, was silent. She remained so until they were done purchasing their tickets at the ticket window and had walked outside to the platform to wait for their train. Then she began leaping up and pointing. Tara-woo! She yelled. Tara-woo! I doubt you will see any matadors on the train platform, Penelope remarked. If we were traveling to Spain, perhaps, or to a costume ball. But it was the steam locomotive itself that had overheated the little girl's imagination. It was one of the new, shiny red engines, a flashy piece of engineering and full of pep, too. Returning briefly to the subject of guidebooks, for technical specifications on it, there is no better reference than Craswell's Opinionated Guide to British Steam Locomotives. Alas, copies are notoriously hard to come by. Tara-woo! The boys took up the cry, pointing and jostling each other. Tara-woo! Penelope looked, and although she didn't howl Tara-woo, like the children, she was just as impressed. The locomotive was gleaming scarlet, with a foreboding front grille of inky black. 2 shiny gold smokestacks rose above. Truth be told, the appearance of the bloomer was not unlike a black-nosed, golden-horned, blood-red bull, snorting and puffing steam out of its nostrils and its tall, glittering horns. When the conductor sounded 3 deafening, mournful hoots of the train whistle, the children covered their ears and howled even more loudly in protest. All aboard! The conductor cried. This is the London and North West Railway 1107 train for London, making all local stops. Final destination will be Euston Station. Clutching their second-class train tickets, Penelope helped the children up the steep metal stairs. It was just the 4 of them. Lady Constance and Lord Frederick would be driven to London by private coach in a day or so, as soon as Lord Frederick put his business affairs in order. The servants had gone ahead with the luggage so that they might unpack and prepare the house for the family's arrival. Metaphor! Metaphor! Cassiopeia kept shouting as they boarded the train. The child was undoubtedly mistaken, for in the first place she meant matador, and in the second place there was no matador, just a bright red steam locomotive. But in another, one might say, metaphorical way, she was perfectly correct, since a train whisks its passengers from here to there in much the same way that a metaphor carries one idea into another. If Penelope had been paying full attention, she might have pointed this out to the children and made a fine lesson of it. But her mind was on a different train ride altogether. "How interesting it is," she mused as she settled the children into their seats. "Ashton Place felt so strange to me when I first arrived here from my familiar, beloved Swanburn on a train very much like this one. And now Ashton Place is home, and London is the strange new destination." Then another related thought occurred to her. What would it be like to see Miss Charlotte Mortimer again? Penelope felt that she was scarcely the same person she had been at Swanburn. She was no longer a student. Now she was a teacher like Miss Mortimer. She'd grown taller and filled out a bit. This she knew from the fit of her clothes. "Dear me, I hope she doesn't ask me to call her Charlotte," Penelope thought in alarm. It would be terribly awkward after thinking of her as Miss Mortimer for all these years. Yet I suppose that is how life goes. Penelope closed her eyes, for she suddenly felt drowsy. New things become familiar with time, and familiar things become strange. It's very curious and tiring to think of. Already the train was having its inevitable nap-inducing effect. The 3 incorrigibles were out cold, nestled in a heap on the seat, and Penelope was ready to follow their example. As the train wheels clickety-clacked along, Penelope's head slowly leaned back against the seat. Her eyelids grew heavy until finally they fluttered closed. The copy of Hicksby's Guide began to slip from her loosened grasp. Now it lay in her lap, jostling back and forth with every lurch of the train. From there it would soon fall to the floor with a thud. Penelope was startled awake to behold a most unexpected scene in which all 3 incorrigibles played a prominent role. Alexander's teeth were bared to the morsels. Molars! Beowulf was growling like a mad thing, and Cassiopeia's jaws were locked onto the sleeve of a man in a long black coat, who was trying unsuccessfully to shake her off. "I beg your pardon," the man said heatedly. "Miss, could you call off your children? The girl's about to draw blood." "Children, whatever is going on?" Penelope cried. "Man steal book," Alexander said in a fierce, low voice. His eyes were fixed on the intruder. The fellow was tall and rotund, with a misshapen nose and a hat pulled low over his eyes. Penelope glanced down into her lap. Her Hicksby's Guide was gone. Frantically, she looked around the seat and floor. Then her eyes traveled upward to the man's arm, still held fast by Cassiopeia's teeth buried in the coat sleeve. The book was dangling between his fingers. "I will take that back, thank you," she said curtly, snatching the book away. "It was fallen to the floor, miss. I only meant to catch it and put it on the seat next to where you were sleeping," he said. "The floor is so dirty and damp, it would have been ruined." "Thank you kindly for your trouble." Out of the corner of her eye, Penelope noted that the children were still on high alert. What animal instinct did they have, she wondered, that made them know that a danger was present? "It's a ridiculous book in any case," the man pressed on, "full of mistakes and out of date. If you like, I will give you my copy of Parsons' pictorial pamphlet depicting the city of London and environs, 2nd edition, and take this worthless tome off of your hands." "A moment ago you were afraid it would be ruined. Now you're saying it's worthless? I find your arguments somewhat contradictory." Penelope smiled in a way that was not at all friendly. It was a trick she had learned from Lady Constance, but had never before had reason to use. "I thank you again for your trouble. Good day." "Good day," Alexander repeated through bared teeth, and as a result the phrase, while socially useful, was not very well pronounced. "Good day," said Beowulf most unpleasantly. "Let go of the man's sleeve, dear," Penelope instructed. Cassiopeia obeyed with reluctance. There was a small rip and a half-moon-shaped wet spot on the fabric where her mouth had been. Under different, friendlier circumstances, Penelope might have offered to have the coat mended, but these circumstances were not those. Penelope drew the children close to her and regarded the man with what she hoped was a stern and fearless gaze. The man lingered briefly, as if he would say more. With a parting glance at the Hicksby's Guide, Did Penelope imagine it, or was it a longing, greedy, covetous sort of glance? He left. Cassiopeia wiped her mouth on the hem of her dress. A tiny, bright green feather came unstuck from her lips. She held it between two fingers and then blew it into the air. They all watched as the downy tuft wafted hypnotically back and forth, until it disappeared under a seat. Yuck-a-woo, Cassiopeia remarked before curling up next to her brothers once more. Tastes like pillows. The three children quickly drifted back to sleep. Penelope did not. She remained anxiously alert for the rest of the trip, holding tight to her Hicksby's guide, and ready, frankly, to pounce. London Euston Station. Hold hands, children, hold hands, hold hands. The passengers stampeded out of the train like a herd of cows that were late for a very important milking appointment. Penelope clutched her carpet bag with one hand, and Alexander's sweaty fingers with the other. Alexander held tightly to Cassiopeia, and Cassiopeia held just as tightly to Beowulf. In this white-knuckled way, the three groggy children and their nervous governess snaked through the crowd, searching for an exit. Penelope could not help trying to catch a glimpse of the strange man who had tried to steal her Hicksby's guide. She didn't see him, but in such a large crowd it would have been nearly impossible to find anyone. The thought made her squeeze Alexander's hand so tightly that he yelped. It was an unpleasant incident, nothing more, she thought bravely. I ought not to make too much of it, for pickpockets and rogues are commonplace in London. We must stay on our toes, that's all. With that mentally settled, Penelope turned her attention to a more immediate concern, finding her way to number 12 Muffinshire Lane, which was the address of the house Lord Frederick had rented. She knew that London was a large, bustling, and confusing city, and that one wrong turn might send them wandering down dark cobblestone streets that dead-ended in smelly slaughterhouses and riverfront establishments of ill repute. However, there was a fold-out map in the back of her guidebook, and the children were skilled trackers, at least when in the forest. Once the foursome had elbowed their way out of the station, Penelope tried to get her bearings by holding the map open and spinning it round until it resembled the maze of streets that crisscrossed before her. The sidewalks outside of Euston Station were even more crowded than the interior had been. Passers-by jostled Penelope this way and that, making it difficult to keep the book open to the correct page. Not only that, but the fold-out map was so charmingly decorated with pretty alpine meadows, it was impossible to read the street names. Excuse me, Alexander said pointedly at people that kept bumping into him and pushing past, often while making rude remarks. Pardon me, I beg your pardon. I quite agree, Alexander, Penelope said, making a final, futile effort to read the map before putting it away. There is a distinct lack of good manners on display. Yet there is no need to growl quite so loudly, Beowulf. Someone might take it the wrong way entirely. Penelope was still not entirely sure in which direction they needed to go. Herding the Incorrigibles before her, she moved towards the nearest intersection. Omnibuses hurtled down the streets at an alarming speed, and a line of hansom cabs waited at the curb. The drivers prowled the sidewalk, angling for customers. Need a cab, miss? Where you going, miss? Give you a lift? Half fare for the children. Penelope thought she might have enough money in her purse to pay for a cab, although she had no idea how much they charged, as she had never taken one before. But the drivers seemed somehow menacing to her, with their fake friendliness and huskering offers for a ride. Perhaps it was some lingering disquiet from the unpleasant incident on the train. She found herself backing away from the line of cabs and clutching the children even more tightly than before. We shall walk, Penelope announced to the Incorrigibles. I'm sure it cannot be very far to Muffinshire Lane, and there will be so many interesting sights along the way. At that moment, a gusty wind kicked up and nearly blew the four of them in front of a bus. Penelope waited until the wind died down before continuing, this time with one hand holding onto her hat. As Agatha Swansburn once said, assuming that one is on dry land, the best way to see the sights is on foot. Otherwise, use a canoe. Come along, children. Actually, Agatha Swanburne never said any such thing, at least that Penelope knew of. But somehow, pretending that she had made Penelope feel a tiny bit less nervous, as she and the Incorrigibles began to navigate their way through the unfamiliar streets.